Hi, everyone. Pastor Galen, lead pastor at Cheyenne Hills Church. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. We hope that these podcasts will be a real encouragement to you on your spiritual journey. You can also connect with Cheyenne Hills at CheyenneHills.org. Hope you enjoy the program.
We are across the street and around the world, Cheyenne Hills.
Well, hello again, everybody, and Happy New Year. This is the first time we've been in studio, 2023. I actually wrote a check today, and I put 23 on it. You know, I had to think about it.
It feels like a science fiction sort of number, you know?
No kidding. Seriously, that is truly true. Okay, so Christmas, have a nice Christmas.
Wonderful.
Yeah, good
How
time.
about you and your family?
Yeah, we got home. We got to see family in Kansas and everything, and barely got back across it was a kind of a treacherous snowstorm, so we barely, it was kind of treacherous actually for a hunk of time, but anyway, we made it back, and good time. We just had a great time here at church and Christmas Eve. I'm just so proud of our team and everybody. It takes a lot to put a Christmas on.
Oh, yeah.
And, we had just one of the things we did was focused on a ministry, across the street ministry.
Yeah.
And raised, whatever's raised, that night, goes toward them, and we raised kind of our goal was 20,000. We came within $100 or so of that.
Praise the Lord. That's big.
Isn't that neat to be able to see the community come together and and give like that? That's, I don't know. It just feels good to be a part of that.
Yeah. Your church has done a great job. That's why I've said it before. I love the motto, across the street and around the world. Yeah. And you guys really have lived that out. I've had the chance to experience that over and over again now that I live in Cheyenne. Yeah. I've seen that. And also I think sometimes people don't realize just the work that goes into putting on something for Christmas.
Oh, man. I
was talking to a pastor on the other side of the state just in the last week or so. And they were talking about how they do everything that's normal, a pastor normally does, only a whole lot more of it.
Yeah.
And that's what happens around Christmas. I remember being, when I was in Thermopolis, I felt like I didn't have Christmas for 13 years in a row because it's so busy. And about the time Christmas, you finally get to relax just a little bit and feel Christmas is December 26th.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah.
And so I appreciate all the work that you guys have
done. Well, all this talk about Christmas, I kind of feel like I need to say Happy Hanukkah.
Right.
Yeah, because you kind of spent some time in Israel during Hanukkah.
Right, exactly.
Is that right? So tell us what you saw.
Yeah.
Do they do any kind of decorating or any kind of something special for Hanukkah?
It's beautiful.
Really?
So we were in the Christian quarter. So first of all, this was a 14-day trip, 13-day trip.
Unbelievable.
It was intense. So we had one of the world's eminent archaeologists with us, and then Dr. Bookman from Shepherd's Theological Seminary, who's done this for 40 years.
Great guy. Wow.
And I think he's right around a little over 90 times he has taken a deep dive. We're talking seminarians there. Wow. So, and they warned us beforehand, you need to be ready to walk at least 8 miles a day.
No
we're
kidding.
hitting 6 to 7 major archaeological sites, major sites, walking all over places. So this was a no-joke study trip.
Okay, so, and I know it was with some of your studies at the Shepherds, right?
Yeah, it was a 3 credit
busloads of people, is that right? I can't imagine even the logistics of all that. That's food and hotel, and there's a lot of logistics.
We had a guy, Dr. Clayton Schultz from the West Institute in Laramie that also was part of he helped set it up.
Okay.
My respect for him has always been high, but I got to see him in action.
Yeah.
And part of it, when someone's pouring themselves into your life like that, the only way to walk away is to say, I love that guy. Yeah. And I really, truly felt that with these folks who are pouring themselves into people and trying to show them this is how it matters. But coming back to your original statement, being there during both Christmas and Hanukkah was fun. Yeah. So on the city walls, the old walls there, they use these laser light shows. And they'll have the Hanukkah thing, and there's Hanukkah music going on, and then you get around just a little ways into the Christian quarter, and there's Christian, not American music either.
Okay.
It's like an Armenian sort of Christian thing going on,
and
Christmas trees and light bulbs, and it was just fun on every level.
So they have Christmas trees in the Christian quarter in Jerusalem.
It was great.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to get to some of your top places that you visited, but before you get there, and maybe this is answering both questions, but I'd like to know just a little bit about the archaeological. What is something new and exciting that's happening that caught your attention there?
Well, there's a couple of them. There are so many of them, honestly.
Yeah.
I had to take a test every night and all those different things. So there's a whole bunch of them. If I bog us down, you just let me know.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like,
One of them, there was an archaeological find just in the year 2021.
okay.
That is a Moses seat. That was found at the dig in Magdala, where
Okay.
Mary Magdalene was
Yep.
from,
Yep.
just 2 miles away from Capernaum.
Yep.
So this is a new recent find there. And so you look at it, it is a genuine, probably the first that they found that is a first century
Okay.
synagogue. So you go to Capernaum,
Yeah.
and that is a 3rd century synagogue. So it's a new
Okay.
synagogue that's built on top of the one Jesus would have
Right,
spoken
because
in.
that it's underneath there. You can
Right.
kind of see that. Yep.
And
I
Bookman likes to
remember
say that you're in the same airspace.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, but when you go to Magdala,
That's
you're
it.
actually there.
that. You're walking on the original.
Right.
See, we were there. I can't remember when the last time. It's been 2018 maybe, but that was just being discovered. The
Right.
Magdala, the whole area where. Remember the sea kind of receded because of the. So I guess it still has receded because it hasn't come back.
It's a permanent place.
Yeah, so I think their water table has gone. I mean, not the table, but the water levels have gone down because of the irrigation. Probably,
It's just perfect. Yeah, it's
so you can
perfect to
see all
dig
those
there.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
One of the things that they found there is a bunch of mikvaot. You know what a mikvah is.
Yeah.
It's the old ceremonial cleansing thing
Yep.
you would walk in.
Yep.
Always had to have flowing water
Yep.
and those kind of things. And so Dr. Bookman used the opportunity to really talk to us about something that happened. So you don't have record of mikvaot in the Old Testament.
Okay,
This is an intertestamental thing that developed,
Oh.
that came out of Babylon. And it's amazing. He said, look at God's timing here.
wow,
Because the understanding of a mikvah and what it meant is
that was
something
Babylonian.
that was something right after the destruction of the temple, and talking about people being ceremonially cleansed.
Well, let me before you go
Yeah.
on, let me explain it just kind of a visual. So, what I remember is the mikveh around Jerusalem, anyway, by the southern steps.
Mhm.
They pretty much were. I think the water was probably maybe waist high.
Right.
So they walked down on small, narrow steps of concrete or stone steps into the water. They dip under and then they walk on different steps coming up out of the water. I don't know if they're all that way, but that's
They're
the ones
all the
I've seen.
same.
Oh, they're all the
Right.
same.
Right.
And so there was a bunch of those also down in the Dead Sea area, the Qumran area. Those guys did.
Yeah.
They did went under the water morning and night as a ceremonial cleansing. Okay, so did not realize it was Babylonian.
Well, so
That's
it's
interesting.
Jewish, but after the fall of the temple, it began in that intertestamental period.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's not. It doesn't go back to. You don't see it
You don't see the
spoken
Old
of.
Testament.
Right.
Gotcha.
And yet God uses something that's developing,
Yeah.
and then has for ceremonial cleansing, if you will, but also a baptism of repentance
Yeah.
with John the Baptist. And so when you look at this, where
That's
Jesus
really brought
identifies
to the
with,
fore.
yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So you have a couple centuries
Yeah.
of something that God planned well ahead of
Yeah.
time,
That's cool.
so that when His Son arrives, it was just one thing. We went to Chorazim.
Okay.
The Bible doesn't record a lot of things about Chorazim. It
Right.
just says, "Woe unto you, Chorazim." I
Yep.
think it's the only instance in the Scripture.
Yep.
And yet clearly the Lord spent a lot of time there, because the Bible says that He had so many miracles, there were too many to number.
Now, was this where Peter and some of those guys were from?
No,
Where's Chorazim?
They were from Capernaum. Chorazim, though, is if you go, you see the Sea of Galilee in your
Right.
mind. If you go north just a little bit up the Jordan River.
I've got the right place. I just
Yeah.
had the wrong. I thought that's where Peter was from. It's
No,
not.
no,
Okay.
uh-uh.
But anyway, I know the area you're talking about.
Right,
But
yeah.
that's a relatively new.
Dig there,
Dig there as
and
well, yeah.
they're doing a lot of really great work there, and
Yeah.
you can tell this is first century time frame.
Yes,
because
right.
again, the black basaltic rock is what they're uncovering,
Yes,
and not the
right.
later marble and things like that
Right.
that had to be imported.
Yeah.
And so it was glorious. But I tell you, those are some of the archaeological things.
The
But there are
highlights.
two things that popped
Okay,
out.
just a second. I got to ask you.
Yeah.
So, what did the Moses seat look like? This is the seat that the priest sits on. Did Jesus sit in the Moses seat when he read Isaiah 61?
Yes.
I thought so. What is
Yeah.
it? So, what did it look like? Describe it to us.
So it's kind of short. It has these stubby little legs on the bottom of it, but it was made out of stone.
Yep.
And then the top has been carefully carved. It's very beautiful.
Okay.
And it was made out of pure stone.
Okay.
And so when you sit there, it is very clearly a place.
Chair looking.
Yeah.
Kind of chair. Or was it
Yeah.
more like a bench, just a one or stool? More
A
like
very
stool?
low stool
Okay.
sort of thing.
And then the back was maybe just come up to your
Very
your
low,
back,
right.
low back,
And
then-
and it's more ornamental than anything
Gotcha.
else.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's just, it was glorious.
No, that's really cool. That's a cool find. I don't know that I've ever seen one. I mean,
Yeah.
I've seen a remake of a stone Moses seat, but
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's
It's
great.
glorious. I'll tell you what. So I'll just give you a brief recap of
Yes.
day one. Then I'll tell you about the thing that hit me the most.
Okay, that's what
later
I'm
on.
here. Yeah.
Day one, we started off in Tel Aviv.
Okay.
Down at the beach, we're looking over at Yaffo, the port Yaffo,
Yeah,
which is
sure.
ancient Joppa.
Yeah.
Jonah. I mean, it's a big deal.
That's cool.
You're in a place later on, you can see this is where Peter was
Yep.
when Peter received a vision. And then he takes off and heads up to our second stop, Capernaum.
Yep.
I'm sorry, not Capernaum, but Caesarea Maritima.
Yep. Caesarea.
And so we get there, and the whole time Bookman's talking about all the details and what it meant. And we sit down there, and you realize this is the first place where the Gentiles, where you and I receive the
heard the
gospel,
gospel. That's
right? So it's pivotal. Literally, our spiritual lives are tied in some way to that place right there.
Yeah.
God gave the gospel to the Gentiles.
Right.
But the first place we sat down there was the theater.
Okay.
And Bookman takes out a Bible and reads from the book of Acts about something that happened right there. So this is where Herod, I think it's Herod Agrippa, the Bible says, and Josephus's account is almost identical.
Okay.
Both of them say the same thing, just about the time the sun is coming up, that the sun shone on these silver or gold robes that he's wearing. And the Bible says that he is stricken with worms and dies a few days later.
Right.
Well, he's looking at that, and he said, look at where the sun is at this point. This is in the morning. He said, now look, it couldn't have been there. This is the king's area, the dais, where he would have sat if he was watching a program. The sun doesn't hit that. So, but if you look at where I'm standing right now, or look at where the stage is right now,
Okay.
the sun would have hit perfectly right there. And that sun, when it broke over the top right here,
Okay.
it dazzled everyone. And they began to cry out, he's a god.
Oh, wow.
And he didn't deny it.
Right.
And he was immediately stricken with worms. Josephus backs that account up.
Is that right?
Now, that's an extra biblical source that who's
so
extremely
would he been
reliable.
center stage then?
He would have been center stage.
Center stage, yeah. Oh, my God.
And you're thinking, I can
my
see it.
gosh.
I'm sitting in the place where someone saw that.
Yeah.
And they wrote, I've read about this my whole life, and
The
it
sun
happened
came
right
up
there.
and just shined on that spot. That's cool.
We drove from there, and there's so many stories there, but we drove from there to Mount Carmel. This is day one.
Yeah. That's good.
And we're within, say, 2 football fields of where Elijah had a showdown with the prophets
Yeah.
of Baal.
Yeah.
We drove from there to Megiddo, where Armageddon rising below it, above it, and the valley of Jezreel, where there will be a great battle fought someday. From there, though, this is one that hit me really hard that first day, although it's not the one that hit me the most. We drove down to an overlook that the Israeli Antiquity Authorities have put up on the edge of Mount Gilboa.
Okay.
It overlooks the southern edge, or the eastern edge of the Jezreel Valley.
Okay.
And Bookman starts going chronologically and showing you things. It was cool.
Like what battles happened? And that kind of thing.
The first one he points out,
Okay.
he said, and he talked about Deborah and Barak. Then he
Okay.
says, right below here is a spring,
Yeah.
and it's called Gideon's Well.
Okay.
And he said, we're about 99% sure
No kidding.
that's the one. It's the only one that would
I
have.
didn't know that.
Yeah, that's the one.
Oh my
And he's
gosh.
pointing out all the different things, and he's feeding you tons of data
Yeah.
to back it up. And he said, now look right over there. And we're looking at the hill Tabor, right on the edge of it. He
So
said,
are you talking across the valley now?
right.
Okay.
So the Jezreel Valley shaped like an arrowhead.
Yep.
And like the shaft, kind of crooked shaft of the arrowhead is the Harod Valley that
Okay.
moves from west to east.
Okay.
And so we're kind of at the beginning of the Harod Valley, looking into the Jezreel.
So Nazareth is just right on that hilltop.
Right,
Yes,
exactly,
I know
just
exactly where you're
beyond it.
standing. Yep,
Yeah.
I know you're exactly where you're
And
talking.
the hill there, he said that's where the Midianites would have been encamped.
Okay.
And he's pointing out, he said later on, and he said not that top city up there, but the smaller village just below it that later became known as Shunem. We haven't even gotten to that yet. And he said, That's where they would have encamped. And he starts to play out the battle in front of you.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And he says, now here's the second thing. Right where we're standing, somewhere very close, is where Saul and Jonathan and the Israeli army was lined up. And later on, the Philistines were basically encamped in almost the same spot.
Is that right?
And this is where they died.
Wow.
And their bodies were taken.
Okay, wait, stop.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you think does he say they think they died on Gilboa or on that side or on the
on Mount
Carmel?
Gilboa.
Okay, on the other side.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And and he's reading the passages that back it up. And then their bodies were taken, I think it's 8 miles or something down the Harod Valley and nailed to the walls of Bet Shan.
Yeah.
And so you can see the proximity of everything. And it was just extraordinary. So then he says, right here in front of us, and he's going through all these different details. Or here we go. Let me go backwards just a little bit. He says, right behind us is where Omri and then his son Ahab would have had their palace.
Okay.
We are probably standing very close to probably in Naboth's vineyard.
Oh, wow. So they think that, I've never connected these dots, if this is what you're saying. So when Elijah came and called down fire and he built this, that was basically within a stone's throw of his palace?
No, that was on Mount Carmel. We're now on Mount Gilboa.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So
okay,
we're
you guys moved. Okay, gotcha.
Right, 20 miles
gotcha.
down the valley. Yeah.
Yeah, I gotcha.
And so, we went from Carmel to Megiddo, which is partway down, and then we got all the way down to Gilboa.
Yeah.
But he said, this is roughly where Samaria, and he said, tell Samaria is right over there.
Gotcha.
And so we're standing in Naboth's vineyard.
Yeah.
And then while we're looking at all of this, he says, see that little town over there? Remember, we called it Shunem. That's where the Shunamites' ladies' home would have been, just over there. And she built a chamber for Elijah to stay in.
Okay.
He was the one that prayed, and she had a baby. Eventually, the young man died, and Elijah was able to bring him back to life. Yeah. Anyway, that's
all right there.
One spot.
Isn't that crazy?
That's how compressed things are in Israel.
I know. And I've seen some of those kinds of things, but he really is putting a lot of layers. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Early, middle, even New Testament, it sounds like some things that took place for sure.
And he's going through the biblical accounts. So when you are standing in a place,
that's great, and
you're reading the Bible and you realize there's a lot of religions that can't do that.
No, that's true. That's exactly right.
And every time they dig, the evidence is that clear. Yeah. When we were up in Tel Dan, up north, Bookman, he says, hey, do you see, we went up into that temple of Baal. Mm-hmm. And we're going through a whole bunch of different things based on the history and archaeology and geography of Israel. So it's a super deep dive. And he said, see how this stone is splintered. It looks so different than everything else. He said that only happens through intense heat. So someone burned this city. And he starts going through the archaeological evidence. And the time frame of that particular burning happened with Deborah and Barak. It hits it perfectly.
Okay.
And about a century before, with another burn layer, there are only 3 cities that Joshua burned in the conquest.
Oh, wow.
So this is fun.
No kidding.
I'm going to take a little detour here.
Wow.
Bookman was talking about early on, archaeologists would complain that there's not a broad burn layer across all of Israel from the conquest.
Right.
And he stopped and he said, any Bible-believing Christian would be appalled if there were.
Oh.
And he said, here's the reason.
Because it only said three of those places were burned?
Well, yeah, only 3 burned.
Yeah.
And so there's not a burn layer everywhere else.
Yeah, right.
But Moses had already said, you will live in houses you haven't built.
That's true.
You'll occupy vineyards that you haven't planted.
Right, that's right.
And he said, literally what happened is there were these large open field battles that destroyed all of the warriors in places, and they literally could walk right into the cities and occupy them. Okay. There's only 3. Jericho.
Okay.
Ai is how he calls Ai. I've always grown up saying it.
I have Ai, yeah.
And then Hatzor. So it was Hatzor, not Dan. Hatzor.
Is it up there in the north, though?
We're up in the north.
Yeah.
And so all of the evidence is there. And if you read the Bible accurately, the evidence is extremely clear. It just pops right out.
That's really
It was great.
Okay, so I just since we're up in the tribe of that Dan area, it's north of the Sea of Galilee, just so people have a little bit of visual, and it's gorgeous. It's lush, green. It's way greener and more lush than I expected. I mean, it's
jungle-like.
Yeah, almost
beautiful.
jungle. Yeah, it really is. And whereas not too far south of there, it's not. It's pretty arid.
Right.
But in there, it's really, really lush. But we went to a place. It was kind of a city. They think it's the oldest city they've ever. And remember, there's red stone, and they think, and there's steps coming up to it, and it's possible that Abraham entered into the land at that place.
That's right.
What was that called? Do you remember?
That's at Dan.
It's in Dan.
And it's
so I
the
thought,
old mud walls
Yes.
that eventually were replaced by stone. But you're right. We went right there.
Wouldn't that
Yeah.
cool though? I mean, to
Yeah.
think that I think it's one of those. If I remember, our guide said, we're not 100% sure, but it's possible that Abraham walked these steps and came into the country from the north, from the Fertile Crescent, came down and walked through that
Time frame's
old city. Yeah, it's just like those kind of things though are just amazing.
Yeah.
And not he wouldn't have gone too far and seen probably, I don't know if that temple of Dan was there at that time. That's quite a bit earlier. But he walked into a country that was certainly worshiping idols.
That's
and
right.
That's one of the high places.
Yeah.
Well, that's really cool how you're kind of connecting some of these places. I can see them because I've been there.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating. It's important for people to be able to see it. Now, I'm going to go back to something that I thought was cool. I never realized that Nazareth was right on that. Basically, it's on one of the rims of the.
Yeah.
It's kind of at the base, if you will, of the Valley of Megiddo. Right,
Jezreel Valley. You're right. So Megiddo, you can clearly see Nazareth just across the valley.
So Jesus basically grew up looking out over the,
That's right.
out over the ridge down into the Jezreel Valley his whole life. I mean, he grew up looking over that valley.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to think of that, that's the valley that, we're talking the Valley of Armageddon, where this final battle is going to take place and he's going to have this great conquest. I just think that those are cool kind of, I don't know, which ironies, amazing things. Now, one of the things our guide gave us as well is like, okay, now this is the place where I think he talked about Alexander the Great and some of the other, they talked about some other wars that aren't necessarily biblical wars per se, but just that some of those epic kind of battles that happened at different places along that valley.
Yeah, one of the biggest battles of ancient history was between the Egyptians and the city of Megiddo. And this was prior to or during the early part of biblical history.
Okay.
But it's well attested in Egypt in a lot of the different inscriptions there.
Because wasn't that the route for the, to get to Asia? You had to come through, and so they were basically trying to own that that route from basically all the way from Egypt all the way up through the Fertile Crescent. They wanted to control it.
Absolutely. Well, this is one of the glorious things that God did by choosing, of all the places in the world where God could have put his people. He put them in a place that was alongside two major trade routes and yet was isolated, and set up a kingdom of priests to be a testimony to all the nations, the Bible tells us.
That's good.
And so what we have is on one side along the Latins, the Romans called it the Via Maris, but that's the one that goes alongside the Mediterranean Sea.
Yep.
The main route.
Yep.
Then you also have the King's Highway that stays on the opposite side of the Jordan River and goes along that side. So everyone that wants to travel in the Fertile Crescent from Mesopotamia to Egypt has to come
one
by
of those two places.
This kingdom of priests.
Yeah.
And so when it comes to Megiddo, there are only 3 routes to go from the coastal plain into the Jezreel Valley, and the main route goes right by Megiddo.
Oh, wow.
And so you look at that. Everywhere you turn, there's some reason behind why God did what he did, and it's abundantly clear when you're there.
He just brings them right to the front doorstep. That's fantastic. Okay, so you have one big takeaway. What was it?
I was in Jerusalem, second to the last night I was there.
Okay.
Wait,
time out. Did you go down to? Did you see Qumran and you got?
We
to
did. We walked up
Getty?
into the yes.
You got all that.
It was awesome.
That's really, isn't that neat? The Dead Sea is just amazing.
It was.
Did you go float in the Dead Sea?
I did that once before, and
So
I decided the next time I go dip myself in battery acid, I'm not going to do it again.
No, I felt the same way. It's like, okay, I've done that, but you guys, everybody else go on down there. It's cool.
Someone who is listening, if it just take it from me, do not shave within like 2 days before you get in there because it will burn. I'd shave my face
really?
last time. I felt like I had dipped myself in fire.
That is intense. That, of course, I had to taste it. Taste the wine. It is terrible.
It's 10 times the saltiness of the ocean.
Yeah,
it is bad.
It's terrible. Okay, so that you did that route. I just want to make sure. Bethlehem? Did you get Bethlehem?
No, we didn't do that. We did go into the West Bank, but not Bethlehem. We went north with our archaeologist. I kid you not. And to it's now called Nablus, but way back when it was called Shechem.
Okay.
We even had Palestinian kids throwing rocks at us. I kid you not, at Tel Shechem. Wow. But you could see Mount Ebal on the one side and Gerizim on the other. Okay. We went up to the top of Mount Ebal where Joshua in the archaeology proves that it's in the right time frame where there is a massive stone altar that is in only the design that early Israelites would have built them in. And so even non-believers call it an early Israelite cultic altar. Okay, gotcha. Of course, we understand it's not cultic, but anyway, it is an extraordinary thing. But we spent the last 5 days in Jerusalem. Okay. And Bookman has designed this for years this way. We'll do an early morning thing and then an afternoon or evening thing. Yeah. But in the middle, he'll give you the requirement to go visit different sites and write about them. And he wants you to go get lost in the old city. Okay. It's not going to be bad, you know. You're within 4 city walls, and he says anytime you feel like you're lost, just start going uphill, and you'll find the Jaffa Gate, and we're right next to it. Okay. But other than that, it was we got down the second to the last night, though, and he walked us to a place, and I'll give you the diagrams of it. For years and years and years, the place known as the Pavement by tradition, and the tradition only goes back to about the 800s, is a place that is inaccurate. First of all, the archaeology, when they dug out the grout, it comes from Hadrian's rebuilding of Jerusalem into Aelia Capitolina. Okay. So it's the wrong spot. And it's kind of in front of the Antonia Fortress, and it's kind of a place where the Via Dolorosa is based off of. Okay. On the other hand, in the 1970s, for years, they've known that there was a gate. They just called it the Lost Gate that went in and out from Herod's villa, from the palace there. Yeah. And in that palace, you have a place called the Praetorium. Well, the Bible talks about that. And there was a place where, when he was in town, where Pontius Pilate would have lived, and where Herod would have come to stay, in this glorious complex. And there's a gate right there. So in the 1970s, Dr. Shimon Gibson was helping an older archaeologist dig there. And as they got down, he said, "See that arrow slit?" And he points up about 4 stories above you, 3 stories above you. He said, "I used to set my lunch right up there." Oh, wow. And as they dug a lot. Right. Yeah. The Israeli antiquity authorities asked them to look at it. So they're digging. They get all the way down to the bottom, and they find this rocky outcropping that was so big, there's no way to break it out and then just put wall there. So they just incorporated it into the walls. Okay. Secondly, there are steps carved into this rocky outcropping. And then he said, "See this large area right here? It's kind of a patio. And there are big stone pavers still there." As they dug further, there's this large, almost ceremonial steps that lead up to it. And he said, "Let me read a verse to you." And he goes to a verse and he says, Jesus was tried, and it says, at a place known as the Pavement, and in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Okay. He said, in the original language and in Aramaic, Gabbatha literally means a rocky outcropping. Oh, wow. And he said, let me walk you through some of this. And we're putting all these pieces together carefully and deliberately like a master's class would do. Mm-hmm. And he said, I am certain that this is the place where Jesus was tried. Okay. And I'm telling you, I almost went nuts. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I happened to have been, I had climbed up and I was standing on one of those steps, and I thought somewhere within 10 square feet of where I am is where a bloodied and beaten Jesus wearing a red robe and with a crown of thorns was dying for me. Yeah. And life got very real. Wow. And you realize that what we're talking about is the Messiah, the Son of God, literally did this, and every evil thought and every evil deed I've ever done, he paid for right there.
Right.
And then on the cross. And you look at that, and who you are as a Christian becomes extremely real. There's no way to fake it. Right there is where he would have stood as he heard people shout, "Crucify him, crucify him."
Right.
And it makes you wonder, where was I?
Yeah.
Would I have been down there crying out, or is my heart with him here?
Right.
It was very powerful.
Wow.
But I love it.
Man, thanks for sharing that. That is powerful. That is, I wanna get on in a line and say I got to see this spot, because I don't think I've seen this one. So this is interesting.
I have a very thick
really
book that we studied from, and I'll show you
Anxious
some
to
of
see
those.
that. Well, Nathan, thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey. 14 days in Israel with two of the most spectacular type guides you could possibly have.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So thanks for sharing with us. Well, we better kind of land this plane. We're getting kind of close to our time frame here, but want to encourage you all in this new year. We're going to continue to encourage you to be strong and very courageous. God bless you all.